Welcome to the Small Business Tax Savings Podcast, your weekly dose of accounting and tax tips specific to small business owners. You will be on your way to growing your business and paying the least amount in taxes as legally possible. Here's your host, Mike Jesowshek, CPA.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode. Today's topic is, what do I need to know about tax extensions? Now, we're getting close to that time of the year where tax extensions are going to be important to think about. There's so much misinformation about tax extensions out there, and I just want to take some time to kind of smooth out the details of those. Tax extensions can be done. There might be one for your business tax return. There might be a separate one for your personal tax return. Sometimes they're the same. If you're filing a Schedule C or a Schedule E, it's wrapped into your personal tax return, and we've talked about kind of flow through entities. But if you have a partnership, a C corporation, an S corporation, you're going to have a separate tax extension or a separate tax return for your business and then one for your personal, and there might be an extension needed for both of those. That's exactly what we're going to talk about today. So what is a tax extension? The first question we want to talk about, and kind of that answer, that obvious first question, what does a tax extension even mean? Basically, with the IRS and various state agencies, you have an initial due date that your return needs to be filed by. So your business tax returns need to be filed by a certain date. Your personal tax returns need to be filed by a certain date. Sometimes those dates for your business and personal tax returns are going to be the same due date as we talked about. Other times, they're going to be different. And we're going to talk about later what are those due dates for various types of businesses, personal, and everything else. Now, when we talk about your original due date, there's going to be many reasons that you just may not be able to file your tax return by that original due date. Think of things like you might still be waiting on documents. You might be part of a partnership and you don't get tax documents for that partnership till way late. You might be waiting on a 1099 or some other thing that you might not have gotten yet. So you might not be able to file on time. If you're a business, you might not have your bookkeeping completed yet. You need your bookkeeping completed to file a tax return. If you don't have your bookkeeping completed, you might not be able to file your tax return on time. You maybe sent information to your accountant too late. You sent your information to your accountant a week before the deadline or 2 weeks before the deadline. They just didn't have enough time to process that information yet. Or you may simply just want more time just to ensure that you have an accurate tax return. Whatever the reason might be, there's a lot of reasons why people might not be able to file their tax return by the original due date of that tax return. And if you're unable to file your business or your personal tax return by the original due date, you're going to need to file what they call an extension. And this basically means that you're requesting an extension for the time that you have in order to file your tax return. Now, we're going to make this clear a little bit later in this episode, but it's important to note that an extension is an extension of time to file your taxes. Any taxes owed related to that business filing or personal tax return filing, whatever it might be, are still going to be due on the original due date. So essentially, an extension is just saying to the IRS, to the government, hey, I need a little bit more time to file my tax return. I know my tax return is due on this date, but I need more time. And you're requesting an extension to file, which are always accepted, assuming that you file the right forms and are doing things correctly. Now, one thing you're going to want to do is check with your specific state, because sometimes you need to file a separate extension with your state. In other states, they just accept the federal extension. So check with your specific state to see if you need to file a separate extension with them or if that federal extension covers everything. So that's what an extension is. You're just extending the time that you have to file your tax return. But again, the actual taxes related to that return are always still going to be due on that original due date. So let's get to the next question that always comes up when we talk about extensions. Is filing an extension a bad thing? We hear from so many business owners, so many individuals that were told not to file an extension because it's going to increase their risk for an audit, and that could not be further from the truth. Filing an extension has nothing to do with your risk of an audit. In fact, sometimes it can help avoid an IRS audit because you have tax documents that maybe take longer to get delivered, or maybe you never formally got them. Maybe they got sent to the wrong address or something like that. And by filing an extension, it buys more time. If you don't have your bookkeeping completed, you could rush through, throw some numbers together and file a tax return, but that's not going to be correct. And that could increase your risk of an audit. By taking the time to make sure things are done correctly, you can sometimes decrease your risk of an audit by filing an extension. When you file an extension, you also have the ability to request a transcript from the IRS. And a transcript is basically saying to the IRS, hey, can you send me over a listing of everything you have associated with my social security number or my EIN related to income and things like that? And they'll send you what they received. Because the thing is if you got a 1099 for income or a 1098 for interest or whatever it might be, but if you're receiving a form for income or sometimes interest that you've paid, it means that it also got sent to the IRS. If you file an extension, it gives you more time to request a transcript. That transcript is going to tell you what the IRS is showing associated with your EIN or social security number. This can help reduce the risk of an audit because now you're seeing, oh, there's a 1099 there from so-and-so that I didn't receive. Maybe they forgot to email it to you. Maybe you didn't get it in the mail. Maybe it went to the wrong address. But by requesting that transcript, now you got that information. So transcripts are a great option for people just to ensure that they have all the documents that the IRS also has. A few key items to think about when we talk about extensions. You must file your extension by the original due date of your tax return. So if your original due date of your tax return is April 15th, you need to file your extension request by that April 15th, that original deadline. The second piece, and this one is so important, an extension is an extension of time to file your tax return, but not pay your taxes. Your taxes are still due on the normal due date of your tax return. And we're going to kind of drive this one home because I want to consistently help remind you of that. An extension is an extension of time to file your tax return. Basically, that information that you put in the tax return, you're extending the time you have to send that to the government. But any taxes owed from that are still due by the original due date. It's not an extension of time to pay your taxes. Because of that, I always say if you are extending, we highly recommend that you include a payment for the rough estimate of your taxes owed. That's going to help reduce any kind of interest or penalties that you might have on that. So let's say it's April 10th. You know you're not going to file your tax return on time, and you know that you're going to have a tax bill of roughly $15,000. What we would say is, with your extension request, include a payment for $15,000. That means you're paying your taxes. If you go and file that tax return and it ends up only being $14,000, well, you're going to get a $1,000 refund. But you'd rather have that than it going to file your taxes and now having to pay $15,000 and including interest and penalties on that. So we always highly recommend that you include a payment with your extension for the rough estimate of your taxes owed, again, to help minimize interest and penalties. And finally, and this is another key point, if you successfully filed an extension on time, make sure that you file your actual return by the then extended deadline. We always want to make sure we're filing tax returns. That's an important piece. All right, so let's talk about some numbers. Let's talk about some dates. What are the extension deadlines for tax year 2022, and what form do you use to file that extension? Now, there's going to be different deadlines depending on how your business is set up. So if you're set up as an S corporation or a partnership, you need to file your extension request by March 15th of 2023. So you either need to file your S corp or partnership tax return by March 15th, or you need to file your extension request by March 15th. You're going to file your extension using Form 7004. Now, the final due date for a partnership tax return or an S corp tax return is going to be September 15th, 2023, and that's if you filed in a successful extension. So again, file your tax return by March 15th, 2023 for an S corporation or partnership, or file your extension by that same date. If you successfully extended, make sure you file your return by September 15th of 2023. If you're operating as a C corporation, your extension request is due by April 18th, which is also the original due date. So you need to file your tax return or file an extension by April 18th of 2023. For a C corporation, you're going to use Form 7004. And then that final due date, if you have a successful extension, is going to be October 16th of 2023. Now, personal tax returns. This includes Schedule C businesses. If you have rental properties on Schedule E, that's included in this as well. So your personal return, along with anything that's included on your personal return, is due by April 18th of 2023. So the original due date of your tax return, you either need to file your tax return by April 18th or file an extension by April 18th. And you're going to file that extension using Form 4868. If you successfully filed your extension, the due date of your personal tax return, including Schedule C, Schedule E, is going to be October 16th of 2023. So let's do a quick run through again of that. S corporation or partnership, either file your return by March 15th or file an extension by March 15th. If you file an extension, file your return by September 15th. C corporations, personal tax returns, including Schedule C businesses, Schedule E businesses, or Schedule E activity. Either file your tax return by April 18th or file an extension by April 18th. If you successfully extend your tax return, you then must file your tax return by October 16th. Now, what we always say is don't push it to that then deadline. If you have to extend, great, no problem. Let's extend, but let's still keep it a priority. Let's try to get that tax return done instead of pushing it all the way to September or all the way to October. We don't want to just keep pushing things back because that's going to put more stress on you. If you're waiting to file your tax return because you have bookkeeping not completed or things like that, just take some time. Get it done. That's stuff that we want to be forgetting about. We want to be filing and getting it past our mind. So don't try to just push these continually to the next deadline. Because once you hit that extension deadline, there's no more after that. Which brings up questions. What happens if you don't file an extension? So if you missed an extension deadline for whatever reason, or just chose not to file an extension, you're going to be facing some penalties. For an S corporation or a partnership, the penalty is $210 per month per owner. So if you have a S corporation, let's say, with 2 owners, and it was due on March 15th, and you filed it 2 months late, no extension or anything like that, you're going to face a penalty for $210 for each month for each partner that was late. So if you just had one owner for that S corporation and you file it 2 months late, that's going to be $420 penalty that you're going to face for that. If you had 2 partners, that's going to be a $400 or $840 penalty that you're facing for that. For C corporations and your personal tax returns, if you do not file an extension, just file your tax return late after the due date with no extension, there's going to be a penalty of 5% of the unpaid tax for each month, up to a total of 25% of the unpaid tax. So that should be clear indication of saying that, okay, I either need to file my tax return or just file an extension. Extensions are easy. Fill out the form, send it in, do one or the other just to make sure that we're getting that taken care of. Now, one thing to know about this is sometimes penalties you can request relief from where they would waive that penalty, but I would not depend on this. Now, if you're stuck in a situation, you didn't file a tax extension, or you thought you did, but your accountant didn't file it in, or whatever it might be, you might be able to request some relief where they might remove some of those penalties for you. But again, don't depend on this. Either file your tax return or file an extension. Now, one thing to note here is that if you did not make a tax payment on time, there would be interest tacked on to that as well. Remember, an extension is a extension to file, not pay your taxes, so there could be some interest on the tax payment as well if there was a tax owed. So let's look at everything as a kind of an important item, some recap of this extension topic. Filing an extension does not increase your risk for an audit, and in many cases, it may decrease your risk of an audit if you are proactive in other areas. The other key thing is be sure to file your extension request on time by the original due date. So you have 2 options. You file your tax return by the original due date, or if you're not ready to file an extension by the original due date and include any taxes owed that you expect with that extension filing. If you successfully filed an extension, be sure to make that final filing by the extension due date. Again, we want to make sure that we're filing our tax returns or filing an extension and then filing it by that extension due date to avoid any kind of penalties. Those are just senseless loss of money with penalties. An extension, again, is simply extending your time to file your taxes, file your tax return. Any taxes owed are still due on the regular due date. So you could face interest, you could face penalties if those are paid after the due date. So again, if you're not sure what your tax bill is going to be, throw an estimate in there. If you overpay, you're going to get it back in a refund. Better safe than sorry there. If you're extending, be sure to include a payment to the IRS with an estimate of what your tax bill will be. Now, you might be saying, I can't afford to pay a tax bill, or how do I even make that payment? And if you need to know where to go to make a payment, or if you're struggling with funds to be able to afford a tax bill, at least at this current time, we're going to be talking about this all next week. We're going to be talking about what options do you have to pay for your tax bill. So definitely check that out. Hopefully this was helpful. We're coming up on extension deadline very soon on the business side, and then again on the personal side after that. So I just wanted to make sure that this was clear. I wanted to make sure that everybody understood how important it was to either file your tax return or file an extension, and if there's going to be an amount owed in that, to include that with your extension filing. So hopefully that was helpful. Again, tune into next week. We're going to be talking about how do you pay your tax bill and what happens if you don't have the funds available to pay your tax bill, what options are available out there to you. But again, important piece that we're talking about today was extensions. Thank you again for listening to another episode, and I will see you next week.
This has been another episode of the Small Business Tax Savings Podcast. If you enjoy our weekly episodes, please leave a review and share with other business owners. You can find previous episodes and more information at www.taxsavingspodcast.com. Thanks for listening and have a great day.